our job is to help you, get into these fields, to get promoted, to do all the vocational side of things alongside the educational. The fellows program is to take people from all over, give them some specific skills, and basically add a policy aspect to whatever their core thing is. So and you're working on energy. Let's look at energy security and write something specifically for that. We'll teach you how to do policy on top of your own core competency. And then you present that at the symposium. Our goal is to improve national security. And we can do that through education. We can do that through educating the public. But one of it is just, we can put people in the same room and say, if you two talk together, we'll be able to solve this problem better.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Today, we'd like to welcome Dr. Philip Hultquist, the director of the Global and National Security Policy Institute at the University of New Mexico. He is a research fellow for the Modern War Institute at West Point and a non-resident fellow for the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. Previously, Philip has taught politics, policy, and strategy for the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies. If you like the work we do here, we'd really appreciate if you leave a comment, rate the show on Spotify, give it a like, or subscribe to us. Another thing we're working on, or we have up right now, is our Facebook page and Instagram. You can follow us at Global Pack Podcast. Again, we really appreciate everybody listening in. Yeah. I think we had talked about this before, but how did you find yourself coming to UNM? Because originally, you're not from New Mexico, are you?
No, it's kind of a weird story. I mean, there's the story of how I came back, but the story of how I got here the first time was really idiosyncratic. I was in my undergrad. I went to Missouri Western State College. Now it's Missouri Western State University in St. Joe, Missouri. I didn't have big academic plans. I wasn't on a track to go to Harvard or anything like that. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was thinking about law school, and then I was majoring in political science, thinking about law school, and I put off all my international courses because I thought they were kind of too hard. I was kind of more focused on American politics. And then I had to finally had to catch up my junior year. So I took international relations and foreign policy, and that was the spring of 2003, which should strike you as a reason that kind of tipped my interest, right? That was the year of the invasion of Iraq. That shifted my plan toward international relations. And then I started looking for schools, and I didn't really know where to go, what was the purpose. And I literally had a friend that wanted to come here. We'd grown up together. He went off to another college, and then he wanted to go to get a PhD in herpetology, and New Mexico was a great herpetology school.
Herpetology at UNM? Is it still known for that?
I think so.
Also, what is that? Is that like a PharmD program?
It's biology, study of reptiles.
Okay.
Biology is like reptiles. And I didn't know, I only know this because of him. Except that when we go camping, he was always looking for snakes and stuff. I would always pretend to look, but really try not to find any snakes. And so that was kind of idiosyncratic. I never thought much about New Mexico. I grew up in Iowa, and I was in college in Missouri. So I came here for really random reasons, wanting to study international relations, not really sure what I wanted to do. I mean, the main thing I wanted to do was just get a PhD so I could go back and teach at the school that I came from, and sort of get integrated in that town. But, when you're 22, you don't know what you're going to do. So you can do lots of things. That's what brought me here. So very strange reasons. And it worked out great. I loved the program here in political science and international relations. And it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. But definitely not a plan I didn't know what would have been a good plan. I didn't know where to go. And then Mexico, my perspective seemed as good as anything. And then it turned out to be amazing.
So coming here, is there something different that we offered?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work on India, and I came to it late. New Mexico is probably not the place you want to come to do India studies. Our main concentrations at the time, and they're still really strong here, are in Latin America studies. So people that do area studies came to UNM, and a lot of people in my cohort were studying Latin America, and kind of a range of things, some of them security related, some of them not. And that's kind of where the real concentration is, and especially was in political science at UNM. That's really across a lot of departments here. And I didn't have any Latin American proclivities. That wasn't really my plan. And everybody in my cohort was quite a bit ahead of me in area studies. They all spoke Spanish. They all had been there, different places in Latin America. I was just still very, green and early in my career, not knowing what I wanted to do. I really wanted to think about U.S. foreign policy. And the people that were here, some of them worked sort of around the edges of that, but most people weren't doing policy. And so I became more of a traditional academic in the sense of you're not necessarily, you want it to be policy relevant. You're typically writing, you're doing what we call empirical research or academic research. It's to expand the knowledge base of how the world works. And so I learned, all the statistics and methods to learn that. I eventually found my way into studying civil wars, civil conflicts. This was 2005 when I got here. Sort of, this was a lot of international wars. Um, in general, the big picture international relations wasn't as big anymore. People were starting to look at internal politics to countries. So I took international relations and comparative politics to sort of understand what's going on with these civil wars, different types of violence, how do you get to peace settlements, things like that. That turned out to be very useful for a security studies career, but that again wasn't really my plan. My plan was to, write a good dissertation, publish out of it, get a job teaching, which I did, but the policy side of things only came a little bit later, and the India stuff only came later. So I was writing a dissertation. I wrote my field paper. My first paper that was published was on peace settlements, and it was statistical paper. And I'd still really never been outside the country, and not well traveled. I decided to change my topic for my dissertation to the dynamics of state violence in civil wars. Basically, why do states target indiscriminately in civil wars, around the world, not our civil war necessarily, but around the world? Why is this a common thing that we observe when most people believe that it's counterproductive? So I wrote some statistical things on sort of demonstrating why it is mostly counterproductive and at least risk being counterproductive.
At that time, was Kosovo happening? Was that before or after?
The kind of the
The
those wars,
Balkan
former
stuff happened.
Yugoslavian wars. Some of that was still going on, particularly Kosovo. Um, when I was in high school, that's when like the big ones were happening, Bosnia, and there, peacekeeping missions were still going on. Some American involvement, I think, still was going on.
One of our alumni deployed there on one of the peacekeeping missions, so that's why I was just wondering.
That would have been cool. I mean, at that age, I'm not sure I would have been too scared to go. I was very sheltered, mostly reading about everything. I ended up just finding this case study that helped with the dissertation that was based in India, in Punjab. So I studied the Punjab crisis of the 80s and 90s. And I found that when I was studying that, I needed to know more about India in general and South Asia in general, just for context. And the more I got into it, I just found it fascinating. So I'm really kind of more self-taught in India. Like I've taught a lot of courses on India. I write on India, but I've never taken a class in India. On India. Of all the people that taught political science courses on India, I might be the only one at UNM that's ever.
That's really cool. I mean, honestly, having a history background and I don't know, for my undergraduate, the capstone of like getting a research paper done, but finding your own topic and research and doing it, I think it's just as valuable as learning from somebody else, if not more, because you're sort of uncovering what it's like to, I don't know, understand the topic, not from maybe somebody's bias or whatever.
Yeah, I think like the typical path to area studies, or really most PhD studies in this field, is you want to find someone that does what you want to do. School, you apply to those programs, you get them to sponsor you, and you work for them for assistantship, and you become kind of a protege. And then you, especially in area studies, you want to get a Fulbright or something that puts you in that country for a while. You learn the language. And I just did it all backwards. I didn't know what I was doing, so I just became interested in it, and I decided to learn it. And India is so complex that I just had to find other ways to validate, to make sure what I was learning was, was the right stuff factually, but also to get as many different perspectives as possible, so that I didn't bring my own bias to it anymore. Then you can't, then the level that you can't get away from.
During your time studying that, did I don't know, Russian India relations or Chinese India relations come up while you're doing this? While you were doing your work?
Mostly later. While I was doing that stuff on Punjab in the 80s and 90s, there was an international component to it. A lot of it through Pakistan and to some degree the U.S. In terms of some political cover and then some diaspora politics of some of the Sikh activists who are outside of the country. And if you understand, like some civil conflict, sometimes it's the diaspora that's outside of that region that's sometimes the most vehement about it, or sort of. So there was an international component to it, but a lot of it was just learning how India worked, because my focus was how first India was there. local police were dealing with it, and it was just pretty incompetent targeting. And then eventually went to indiscriminate targeting. And then over time, they were able to kind of hone in and do more selective targeting, which theoretically is much better. It turned out to be better, but also still very brutal. And that's what made it a good case study, is that I could sort of see how they changed organizationally over time.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because that was the big question: is why, if you could target selectively or individually, why wouldn't you? And most of the cases, most countries and India's level of capacity and below just don't have capabilities to do that. So they were kind of a good example of how they got there. Later on, I started playing a much bigger role in the international relations and strategy side of things. So jumps ahead in my career a little bit, but I worked for the School of Advanced Military Studies out at Fort Leavenworth.
Out of your doctoral program, right?
Well, yeah,
Is that
so
what you're in?
I finished here and I got a job at Roosevelt University. So a pretty traditional, a small liberal arts school in downtown Chicago. And I was kind of doing exactly what I had planned to do, which was teach politics, international relations, comparative politics. Taught India, I taught the security studies stuff. And I ran the international studies program there. And then transitioned from there to working for the Army, which is maybe its own story. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, honestly, we do. Going from Roosevelt University to, because a lot of people are even, I'm sure there's, professors and stuff like that out there don't know about those opportunities.
Well, yeah, especially a lot of professors don't think very much about professional military education as an option, in part because they're socialized from their academic departments in grad school to become a professor and to work your way up in both the prestige of the school, but also prestige of your position from assistant professor, associate. And the way to do that is to do empirical academic research and publish a lot in high level journals. And in those schools, you want a tenure track job, right? So that's what's valuable at a regular university. You can do that through a combination of teaching and research at a teaching university, but at a research university, it's more heavily on the research and a little bit teaching. But essentially, that's your path. And working for the Army, professional military education, they don't have tenure. I mean, I guess there's a couple that do, but they're pretty rare. And so most academics are sort of taught and socialized and probably believe that it makes most sense to stay in this area in the universities if they know and they understand the incentives versus taking a risk. They often, actually, military education pays better in a lot of places, not all places, but you give up the security of tenure. There's no, so School of Advanced Military Studies where I went, there's no tenure. I left the tenure track to go there, and mostly and then the incentives are different, so obviously it's very teaching focused, and if you're not a good teacher, you're not going to survive there. And then if you do research, they encourage, but it's not as high up on the priority list. But they would consider lots of things like policy research that's not peer review to still matter to them because you're trying to influence sort of on the intellectual ecosystem. And so you can align those incentives together and do really well, but they're not necessarily on the same path. So that's one of the reasons why civilian professional, professors don't think of it very often. The other part is military education doesn't do a very good job of reaching out to them. So it's written, the job that I applied for was written by the program manager, great guy, and it was written in an Army jargon that no professor would understand and believe, oh, you're looking for somebody like me. And the only reason I believed that was that I knew somebody that worked there that was trained like me. And I didn't know him well. We'd lost touch. I thought, okay, well, maybe what they're really saying in this job posting is they want somebody that can do international relations, comparative politics, teaching policy level of things. And then I basically just sort of was lucky to be right about that. And they actually were looking for a range of things, and this is one of the things they're looking for, which I know was sort of strange. So when I was there, and part of my job was to socialize other academics to say, like, hey, you should know that this option exists, and it's a good option in lots of ways. The best teaching environments you can have, because everyone's a professional, they're working their way up, and they take your expertise seriously. But basically to show them and say, hey, we're hiring, and it says this, what it really means is that. And people like,
and you got that at Roosevelt University. When you were at Roosevelt, basically, you found this opportunity through your friend, and then
more or less. I came across it somewhat randomly. I was looking for another job because Roosevelt, like a lot of small schools, was sort of struggling financially. Whenever a university is struggling financially, one of the ways to cut costs is to fund faculty cuts. And so I wanted to be a step ahead of that and not find myself cut. So that's when I started looking around, and that's when I saw the Army job. I thought, well, maybe I'll just throw it out there and see what happens. And in fact, the phone interview, I was just very honest and said, like this, if you're looking for somebody with operational experience, I'm not it. I've done the reading, I've been to other places. I've got research and things that I think that could help. A lot of it was on irregular warfare, things like that. I was learning about targeting, things like that. But I don't have like a deep operational, I can't teach you about.
How did you get into you just regular warfare? Was it through your initial like sort of studies with India or what?
Yeah, to some degree, it's a different branding of it. So if you could read some of the stuff I wrote that was very academic, and it was about, the human rights aspect of it, to sort of understanding why this happens and how this happens. But you could take that same knowledge and sort of repackage it into like actually irregular warfare, pretty useful, or counterinsurgency. Um, it's not a traditional counterinsurgency thing that the U.S. was involved in at the time in Afghanistan, but it had some features that were like that. The Indian government in Punjab is sometimes often seen as an outside force, even though there's a lot of Sikh soldiers in the Indian army. And so it became, some of the dynamics were similar, where you could draw lessons from India's counterinsurgency experience and draw them to some of the stuff that was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's kind of where that side of things happened. And when I gave my job talk at SAMS, the School of Advanced Military Studies, I gave it on the Punjab case and talked about counterinsurgency and the irregular side of that. And that was very valuable to them. By the time I got to SAMS, that was 6 months later, once the clearances came through, the Army had published the new doctrine, 2017 large-scale combat operations doctrine. And then at that point in time, they were trying to shift a lot of the professional military education away from counterinsurgency and toward large-scale combat operations at great power competition. So I got there and I said, wait, I'm really happy to help you with your lessons on counterinsurgency. And he said, okay, well, actually, we're not really doing very much of that anymore. We're doing this other stuff. So I actually kind of drew back on my experience from grad school in international relations and foreign policy, to kind of make some space for me on deterrence, escalation, and then some cultural studies about India, things like that.
Because they are switching up their curriculum. What was that experience like, having to start to learn something new?
I knew it was good. It was mostly like going deeper on stuff that I'd known and was teaching from a theoretical standpoint, and from, it was always part of my security studies courses, but it wasn't what I had researched. Basically, what I found was, looking into the curriculum that they had me teach, the way they teach there is different too. But there's a course author, that person writes the syllabus and then deliver it to different seminar rooms. Whereas, come from academic world, you write your own syllabus, you deliver it. It's sort of your intellectual property. This is different. This is the Army's intellectual property that somebody wrote for them. And then, so the first year I was delivering somebody else's work. That's sort of how, I was able to look into the stuff that they were doing and saying, okay, well, maybe I could update this here, or occasionally on a few things you're like, okay, that's maybe an older way to think about it. There's newer stuff. Or maybe just stuff that I preferred. I would say like, hey, if I was going to draw on a classic theory, I would draw on this one instead of that one, because I think it's a little more relevant. So that was all negotiated with them. And I eventually took over as course author in my second year for the strategic context of operational overhead class. And that's where I felt like the deterrence portion of that needed some work. And I developed that out in collaboration with other people there. And they're also the other great thing about professional military education is that they're happy to develop you. Like what they want to do is they want to bring in, smart, qualified people, and then they know that I didn't know the operational side of the Army. And I told them, I said, that's fine, we'll help you get that. So if I needed help, okay, I want to know how whoever else thinks about this topic, they'll send you there. You can learn a lot from them. So on the operational side, they sent me to National Training Center, and I had to time observing the Striker Brigade.
That's awesome. How
I got to put on a helmet and get in the jeepins.
Oh, nice. Do they basically send you out there for a week or what?
Yeah, they came in different times. Here, that was some of my professional development stuff sent me out to, I just helped with the regional leadership development program. And while I was there, they kind of tied me into other folks that were doing stuff in the Pacific, because they knew I had this India interest. The NTC, National Training Center, that came later on. We had a leader that really wanted us to sort of see a little bit more what some of the planning was like in real time. And so they sent us out there for some time, and we basically kind of sat on the sidelines and watched people plan and talk about it. The School of Advanced Military Studies, their main program is the Advanced Military Studies program. It's not like you're just changing those words around, but and that's for early career majors, beginning field grade officers who are going to get some special education or extra education, I guess is maybe a better way to say it. Extra training and education on that eventually leads into the very important operational planners. And then they go out usually to a division or a corps or something like that and kind of plan. And of course, we also have interagency and different services and partner nations that are there as well. So it wasn't always, they weren't always focused on the same things. I'm trying to think the other professional development. They sent me back to, actually it was during COVID, so I did it online, but the Indo-Pacific orientation course out at Indo-PACOM, actually it's at the Pacific Center for Security Studies out there. They do a lot of orientation to the region, and that connected me to a lot of people that were basically about to work in the region, from diplomats to defense attachés and things like that. And then really a lot of the stuff that was especially useful for me as I sort of transitioned from teaching in the majors program, which is not really what it's called, it's ANSP, Advanced Military Studies program, to the seniors program, which is a war college level. It still ran out of the School of Advanced Military Studies. It's lieutenant colonels and colonels getting their senior service college, and that's basically one seminar of students, and we would take them to all the combatant commands. I led them on a week to DC, and we'd meet with the National Security Council, whoever else, the Office of Net Assessment, which I don't think exists anymore. There's a few of those things that don't exist anymore, but I try to give them a sense of like what's the broader national security ecosystem. And first years in that, I was learning alongside of them. I had a lot of theory and reading to help me with that, but then that was really where I got to see and then you go back to Indo-PACOM and you get the brief on this is the strategy, this is what we're thinking, and these are the problems we've got. And that helped me think through a little bit more about what the role of India is in this. And it was on the deterrent side, which is a little bit what I'm working on now, is some of the assumptions and things that are built into the way the military was thinking about deterrence in Taiwan. And so now I'm trying to write some policy stuff that sort of maybe help them think about it in maybe a slightly different way.
That's right. Okay. When you say putting together policy, can you describe what that might mean for viewers who might not understand?
Well, yeah, so I'm talking about the ecosystem in DC, is that?
I would say mainly in Indo-PACOM area, like you're saying with India, that's where you're understanding that. Because obviously the government puts together policy in order to meet objectives. What does that sort of look like?
Yes. In some ways, we're using policy in two ways. So one, typically the way that you'll learn policy in your careers you're working up is, there's policy, strategy, operations, and tactics. There's sort of a hierarchy there, and that strategy is a way to implement policy, and operations are a way to implement strategy, things like that, right? And tactics are a way to implement the operation. So that's like a good nested way to think about it directionally. But in a broader sense, we think of policy as just sort of what approach you're taking. So even if I had students that were, my advisees and they're working on their monograph, even doing an operational level thing, if they're trying to influence the approach the Army's taking on something, maybe it's everything from waving, sounding the alarm on whatever it is, maybe a certain weapon system or something like that. You're really thinking about policy because you're thinking about the approach the Army's taking to it. So there's sort of policy in sort of general sense, and then there's policy at the policy level. And so when I'm writing about policy, I use like a policy approach to writing about and policy analysis as a method to make sure that I've got some rigor in the way that I'm thinking about it. And I'm not just turning my ideas, my hunches into academic sounding policy, which is actually the most common type of policy writing you'll see. Is just somebody writing their opinions.
And is policy generally just founded on experiences, data that somebody could take from whatever it may be in order to get
to achieve the ends
to achieve these ends?
So use the example of Taiwan stuff that I'm writing on now. The government policy has been somewhat the same, shifted, but the basic policy approach of the U.S. is the goal, the end, is to ensure that China doesn't take Taiwan by force. So it's a very big level goal. And in the 50s, that looked one way. We had a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan at the time in 1954. And then in the 70s, that looked a different way because we were getting closer, or we were trying to make a relationship with mainland China, the People's Republic of China, and that required us to back out of this defense treaty. But the goal was still the same. And so we switched to like a strategic ambiguity policy or strategy. And so the goal of trying to get China not to take that back by force, that policy has been basically the same, but the how we do it has been different. And now, so basically where this started was, so when I would see somebody tell me their strategy, which is a type of policy, if you think about it in the approach side, if you think of it in the hierarchy, strategy comes from policy. So Indo-PACOM is giving me their strategy, and they're telling me about how they're going to achieve the policy ends of deterring China. So that's all very known, quite a bit how they were doing it. And I was sitting there as the person that was writing the curriculum on deterrence and was sort of, got myself caught up and got deeper on the theory of deterrence. And thought, no, well, maybe that's not, that's like, I'd say that's like half right. You're getting half of it really right, and the other part you're kind of ignoring. And so I could have just written a policy paper that said, hey, in theory, this is how it's supposed to go. And I try to maybe I still can. But what I've decided to do is write the academic side of it first, make sure that the ideas are right, that I can validate the ideas that I've got. And then as those are validated, I'll write the policy things. Nobody in the Indo-Pacific Command is going to read my academic work. That's just, it's too it's too academic jargon, and it's too much statistics. And I mean, at this point, I actually won't have like detailed statistics, but it's, building out this historical argument or building a theory and then validating it with historical argument. But I could take those ideas now that I validated it in a rigorous way, and I can write it up in ways that people in the policy or practitioner world, not just policy, will read it. So I'd want people to read it at specific places in INDOPACOM, certain desks in the State Department, certain people in OSD policy, things like that. And then that's sort of, the theory of influence. You want to make sure that it's academically rigorous, and that's what, it's slower that way.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you do that, then you want to write to the audience that you're trying to influence.
Very interesting the way you put that, because there's different styles of writing in the military and the academic world. I even noticed it here coming back to writing emails or whatever. But when you initially even went to SAMS, I mean, was it a culture shock as far as trying to understand how to or were you writing in a military sort of fashion, sort of succinct, bottom line up front sort of a style?
I had to learn to write that way for certain things, in part because a lot of our assignments asked students to write that way because we weren't trying to teach them. They had their academic monograph that was this like 10-month long process, but then they also had more intermediate things that were written in the Army style that I don't remember anymore. But so I had to sort of learn that so I could grade them on that aspect as well. So we wanted them to take this complex ideas from the class and be able to communicate in a way that their audience, the people that they need to hear that, right? Their commanders, the people above them, and their subordinates can understand, because it's, when we write in a way that's familiar that way. So I had to learn a lot on that side of things, not just on the writing, but just, the original culture shock was gigantic. I wasn't sure. So I knew this was a big step. I was leaving a tenure job. This is something you don't do, a tenure track job. And it's not something that anybody would ever advise their students to go do. And so I was worried about it. And I was worried about whether or not I could survive in an army. Army is a hierarchical environment. You have bosses and there's chains of command, or a chain of command, not chains of command, a chain of command. And it's very opposite in the university, which is very flat. You have a chair that's organizes who's going to teach classes and things, but they're not really your boss. So a university to a non-army environment is the opposite side of the spectrum. So I wasn't sure I could survive in that side of it. So I was worried about all of it. And then I got there in January 2018. My first class wasn't till March. I said, okay, well, what do you want to do till then? I was doing some writing. I was reading ahead of time. They gave me a syllabus to read for this March. But then mostly I just wanted to get in the classroom and see how it went. And so I just sat in on classes. That first one I went into, probably the next day, 2 days later after I got hired, I realized this is a whole new language. I don't understand this language. And I knew it from kind of the academic side of things and reading a lot of even military policy stuff. I know that there are certain words that are used in different contexts, just how many acronyms are used and thrown around, that I realized I need to, it's going to take me a while to catch up on this. But I also couldn't do it all in one time. So I literally had a plan to, learn X number of words a day. And I knew I couldn't even get through a conversation with a normal, an Army officer, a major, with understanding most of it. I was just trying to write down, okay. And then once I started teaching, it became faster because I took it upon myself, and this was really supported by my leadership, that part of their job really is to help them learn to speak civilian, or at least to speak joint, to speak across. And what I found when I was in the classroom asking someone to, every time they use an acronym to explain it, I found that the other people didn't understand it either.
That's awesome.
The artillery officer would talk about something, and then the armor, or maybe the combined arms people maybe knew, but like the civil affairs guy didn't know. Or I realized everyone was pretending that they knew, and not just me. So I just said, like, in my classroom, this is going to be like, so even once I learned it, which you actually do A lot of branch specific stuff I still don't really know. It might always caught up on, but certain levels of stuff I caught up pretty quick. And I looked at it and I tried to learn. I made an effort to green on all of that. But even after I knew it, I made them explain it to everybody else. And then somebody always was like, "Oh, I always wondered what that meant." I mean, always. And so there was so much. Nobody wants to pretend like. No one wants to say out loud that I don't know what you're talking about. But for if you guys started listening to this, ask people. They once you start to learn the acronyms, then it becomes your language, and it's a really valuable thing for everyone to be able to speak in the shorthand that the Army has or all the services. It's what really academics have. They have their own jargon. But if you want to be effective across the group of people that actually just know that, you have to learn to speak across that. And it's okay to ask. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. More on that idea of different languages and different careers. We had talked about Indo-PACOM and sort of going through that, but you had met with some defense attachés and some diplomats. Has any of your work made it to that level? And have you talked with any of those people who are the heads of station?
That's the plan. And I have to say that's like one of the things I haven't done very well is like, there's sort of like two types of academics, one that loves starting new projects and some that love to get the publications and close on those projects. And I've never been a very good closer. I've got I've got many publications, not many, but I've got several publications, but my stack of working papers is actually higher probably now than my stack of published papers. So it's actually kind of one of my sort of resolutions. I was just back at SAMS this last weekend. I was in the classroom helping them with some India stuff, and it was just a blast to be back there. I'm like, oh yeah, what are you working on? Okay, I get it. You're still doing that? Oh yeah. So there's a lot of projects that I have to like get out there and try to get in front of the right people. I have done some of that more informally, but it would be better, and it would be better if those were finished and I could say, here, take a look if you want to read a little further. But, if I go to, I was in India 2024, I was prepping for study abroad, but I was also doing research. While I was there, I reached out to the old network and said, oh, could someone get me into, a few offices in the embassy that I could talk to some practitioners that are there. And so I was able to do that with some different units that are there. It's mostly about asking questions and finding out. It's one of the ways I validate whether I'm right. Like, okay, is this also your impression? Is this also, how are you thinking about it? It kind of goes back and forth. But I usually try to find a way to get those ideas in there. The thing I'm working on is going to look at this, and because my, what I'm finding so far is X, Y, Z, and I think that if you have that approach, it might be useful. So never been in a situation where I can tell anyone what to do, but I can hopefully give people a way to think about something in a little different way, or try to manage the complexity of, you think about a place like India. It's very complex, and the people that come in and out, they're there for a few years, but they're not deep experts. And that's by design. That's a good thing, right? They're generalists, but they're only going to get sort of the skin deep view of it. But if they had a little bit more, or if they knew how to get a little bit more in a rigorous way, that's the other thing we do at SAMS was we built a class that was meant to give this, they would practice on India or whatever session they were in. So my students practiced on India and I taught it, but really we were teaching them the method of how to do this. So those students may or may not ever work on India, but they might find themselves working in, they might find themselves working in Korea, and they need to apply the same logic of inquiry so that they can, sort of understand what you need to understand to operate there more effectively. Once you take into account the perspectives and the socialization of different peoples.
Super awesome. So from SAMS, at what time did you find UNM?
Yeah, that's a kind of a complicated story. But while I was working at SAMS, my wife was she went back to school, so she got a degree in to be a physician assistant. While we were in Chicago at Roosevelt, this kind of came back up around the same time. I was thinking like, hey, this might not be a safe place to stay. And she's like, well, if we're going to go somewhere else, I'm going to go back to school. And I thought, it's a great idea. Let's do it. And so she went back to school while I was working at SAMS. So she was finishing up kind of toward the end of my 5th year there. And so at that time I had worked in the majors program on the operational level, teaching the strategy side of operations. And then I taught in the college level program. And for a short stint, I was the interim director of the advanced strategic planning and policy program, which is the Army's practitioner PhD program. So I'd done a little bit of all the things that SAMS had done, but I wasn't sure it was going to be like a long-term thing. And part I kind of, to some degree, felt like I hit the civilian ceiling, like all the next level up jobs are going to go to retired colonels. And she was finishing at the same time. And And anyway, so it was a time where we were kind of reflecting on, okay, what do we really want to be? Is we loved Kansas City and Leavenworth is a great spot to be. But basically, she was like, all right, well, now it's time for me to look for a job. Where should, well, I'm pretty well built for other professional military education. We can go to Carlisle and just go get a job. But those are places that might hire me. Places like Carlisle, DC, Montgomery. And she's like, oh, well, if we're going to move, we should think about Albuquerque. So when I was here as a grad student, I met her. She's from here. If you don't have to know very much about New Mexico, but it does have this pole, right? And so when she brought that up, I thought, oh, that's actually pretty attractive. But they don't have any professional military education out there. So I don't know that and my resume and everything has sort of shifted to that version of things, right? Like I told you how what your incentives are to be in a university setting are very different actually than the military setting. And I had sort of just took my foot out of the one world and went straight to the, the security military side. So really I lucked out that this position came open at a time when we were looking for something back here. And so she, physician assistants are very marketable, and in a professor world, it takes you a year probably to get another job. And she just opened up Indeed and clicked the button, and she had a job offer within a few weeks. So I'm like, all right, well, that's meant to be, or there's lots of reasons for us to be back. Our whole family's here. We have a lot of great friends here. And it's very attractive. I loved it here. My time was great here. I just got super lucky, really, with Global National Security Policy Institute, needing a director, and then being able to compete for that job, having not really practitioner experience, but my teaching experience was in this professional military education setting, so that it had, to some degree, I was able to have a foot in both worlds, right? I know how universities operate, so I can be effective institutionally. And I know how the broader security stuff works, so I can bring those connections and those things to bear for the students here. Thankfully, they found that attractive enough to hire me. That was about 2 years ago, and I've been loving it ever since. So,
It wasn't specifically into the GNSPI program.
yeah, well, it's all over the place, So when I was in grad school, they didn't have this institute, right? I would have been tried to affiliate with it or do something, just because that's sort of in my interest area. Somewhere along the line, actually, like some of the beginnings of it were starting when I was still here in school.
Okay.
They had hired, which is a story you want to hear about,
But yeah, everybody is probably would want to hear it. Yeah.
And I hope I get this right, because I've heard it mostly for him. That was here. It was basically like sort of two elements that came together and sort of became what is now the Institute. One aspect was they hired Andy Ross out of the Naval War College. So he's an academic. The Navy War College is also professional military education. It's a war college level. And he came out of there and helps out the National Security Studies program, undergraduate focused. And then built in with that, Frank Gilfeather had ran this Intelligence Community Center for Academic Excellence, a grant that's built bipartisan, but to help schools that are sort of outside the traditional Northeast, East Coast place to be able to be competitive for these really good intelligence jobs when they graduate. And so they had sort of worked together on this undergraduate side. And then Emil Makle, who retired out of the CIA, retired back here. And through him and his connections, realized that there's a need for the graduate side. There's a lot of people in security here that could probably use some of the education that he had found very useful in his career. And so they're sort of teaching professionals about the broader policy world rather than the specifics of what. So I don't know exactly when it came about to become the Institute, but those three things kind of built what is now the Global National Security Policy Institute. And they didn't have that as names when I was there. I took a class from Andy Ross on grand strategy, which I now teach stuff on from that. So I was really thankful for his perspective. But mostly we didn't interact very much with the national security side of things because they didn't have a graduate version of it back then. And I wasn't a professional. So yeah, so the institutional setup for this kind of thing, a lot of schools have maybe a national security side of a school of public policy or something else that's sort of public facing for professionals, maybe, school of public affairs. Even sometimes they have schools of professional programs or school of public administration, things like that. And we didn't really quite have something that way. So when Emil and them set it up, they ended up getting set up through the provost office, which doesn't normally house academic programs. But, in some places they might be attached to, so for instance, like the Intelligence Community Center for Academic Excellence, I met a lot of people that worked in that when I was doing that. And some of them might be attached to the Department of Political Science, or they might be attached to an institute, or maybe they just do the cyber intelligence, so they're attached to a cyber institute. So there's different versions of these things at different schools. And ours, what I think is really valuable is that it can cross all these boundaries within the university. So we draw on professors from everywhere from, nuclear engineering, electrical engineering, computer engineering, but also not just engineers, but also geographers and, people in political science. Let's see, we've got people from the law school, we have people from the business school, and then we reach out and find the expertise. If we don't have it on campus, we'll go find it in the community. So we have people that work at Sandia or on the Air Force Base in some capacity that will teach courses for us. So the fact that we can reach out across all these things and make a truly interdisciplinary program is very difficult and uncommon. And that's one of our main strengths, is that, if this was just tied on to a department somewhere or even in a school that didn't, whose main focus was something else, it would be very difficult to have this sort of cross college, cross discipline. So that's one of the values of that.
Yeah. More on that. I mean, who is GNSPI for? Is it for just intelligence professionals, or who's?
No, it's really broad. So global and national security is broad on purpose so that it can, in part, to add a global security perspective to national security practitioners, but also, so that it doesn't just get, sometimes these programs get so niche that they're just kind of speaking to the choir, or here for this graduate program in particular was to bring people in. Whatever your career was, you're going to move up in your career. Pretty soon, you're going to have to start looking out and understand policy more broadly. So to some degree, the Intel focus that kind of came from undergrads and the grad program, they kind of came separately, but now we're all together. And so what really we've done is try to figure out a few different sort of key demographics that we're looking for or that we can help best. And one of those is technical people that are working their way up, are on base somewhere close by or outside of that, right? If it's built for San Diego, Los Alamos, it can also work for Lawrence Livermore or Pacific Northwest. Because it's online, we can do stuff online. And that's kind of been our bread and butter. And then we make sure that they have a broad education. So they take courses in food and water security and global public health security, things like that. So you don't just get one view of security. It's lots of different things. But really what we're doing now, and which is especially relevant to this podcast, is that we're building out another concentration in national security strategy and policy. And part of that is because that's me. That's what I've done for the last 5 years, where I really found a lot of value in teaching that and became, I'd say, pretty good at it. But also it fits a demographic that I think needs to be better served. And that's a lot of military officers that are looking for civilian masters for their promotion. So we have a significant chunk of our students are from the base, maybe the Air Force, but also the National Guard, reserves, other military occupations where they're even civilians. That strategic level thinking would be very valuable for them. And then the reason that I was back at Fort Leavenworth is that I want to talk to their Army Education Center and make sure that the students there, people coming into the Command General Staff College, knew that there's this option down in New Mexico that they might not have thought about. When they walk into that office, there's a bunch of flyers, and there's a bunch of posters, but I want them to know that we have an option and they can learn national security strategy and policy from somebody who the Army trusted to teach at very high levels.
Were those students that you're teaching given masters through that program at SAMS?
Yeah. So one of the things that you can find in your career is that you can, as you're finishing up, you might find yourself with 3 masters,
Right.
So sometimes there's a value in a civilian master's, as often can be very good for promotion but a lot of students will have masters from sort of inside the system. So when you go to see Command General Staff School as part of CGSC, Command General Staff College, you can choose Masters of Military Arts and Sciences and write a long thesis paper in a year. You can do a Master's of Security Studies. And then if you go to SAMS, you'll get a Master's in Operational Art, basically. There's a different way to say that, but I can't remember exactly what they call it. And sometimes these change as the accreditations move. And if you go to the seniors program at SAMS, or if you go to the War College, you get a Master's of Security Studies. So, there can be a problem for students that are going the whole way to collect too many Masters. It's not really a problem they would collect too many master's degrees, but it doesn't always help them on the back end. So so now you're finish up at the Army at some point, and you're going to go to the civilian world. And to some degree, you want the civilian employers to sort of understand what they're getting. Masters of Military Art and Science demonstrates that you can complete long projects, that you can add an academic thing to a military thing, but they don't always know what to do with that. So it's one of the reasons to get a civilian master's along the way, is that can help you, actually helps you speak civilian, helps you speak policy, helps you speak outside of that. And those kind of things are really useful. But it also is a signal to an employer, something a little bit more of what they understand, so they know what this means. Is there any other certificates, whether you're a graduate or undergraduate, um, that's special about the program? Frank Gilfeather originally got this grant to make UNM Intelligence Community Center for Academic Excellence. And then over time, Frank left and we lost the grant. I started, we wrote the grant, we got it back. And so a lot of last year was implementing this grant, and then it was implemented through the Office of Director of National Intelligence. So the reason that that's kind of like, kind of a seal of approval from them is that the Office of Director of National Intelligence, they write the grant proposal process for you to get this grant. And they tell you, these are the things we want to see. These are the things that recruiters want to see. And if you want to make your students competitive for these jobs, this was what would make a good proposal, and then we're going to select the good proposals. And then I was lucky enough to go to a where you kind of bring together the people that have these grants, and so I got a little bit of an inside look of what that office already saw was really successful. And then so when we wrote the grant, we wrote it. The goals are the same. We're trying to build these skills. So they wanted cross-cultural competency. So we built the study abroad program that we sent 8 students to Kenya last year. And then we sent professional development and, so we in different areas. So we sent them to conferences to learn from intelligence studies conferences, or I took a group of 8 students to DC and we met with different agencies out there, different intelligence, but also other parts of the national security ecosystem. So you get a sense of like what this job is like, trying to put them in front of practitioners as much as possible so they can say like, okay, what are the skills? What do you wish you knew? What are the stuff you what do the recruiters want to see? Because marrying that up is the hard part. So, we have the seal of approval and we built the program to match what OD&I wanted, which is also what the recruiters are looking for. So these different pathways, you can come from the STEM side, you can come from area studies and language studies, or you can come from like national security studies. And so that national security and strategic analysis certificate, is really an intelligence analysis certificate. And that's sort of what we made the core of the program, so that no matter what your major was, if you want to do the STEM path, the area studies path, or the national security studies path, you want to get this analytical intelligence analysis capabilities. And if once you have that, that's a real signifier to the recruiters that we have the baseline skills from STEM or from area studies or the language skills or national security studies, plus the intelligence analysis skills, the ones that are specific to the way the intelligence community thinks about things. That's a real signal to them that this person both has the baseline and they've taken some steps to like really move forward on that. So that's an undergraduate certificate, and that's really, I think, useful for cadets, because those analytical skills will help you no matter what, military occupation specialty you end up in. But especially if you find yourself in Intel, I think that would be attractive. It might give a different perspective. I mean, they're going to train you on Intel if you get that MOS, but they'll give you sort of a leg up on that and sort of see it from a broader perspective. So the folks that we have that are going to do it from cyber, everybody goes through the sort of same national security and strategic analysis certificate. We're trying to organize the curriculum for the graduate program into concentrations that put something on your transcript to say a little bit more about what you got. That if you have a professional master's of science in global and national security, you can have a concentration in critical and emerging technology policy, or concentration in national security strategy and policy, or transnational security policy. And that's built not just for the literal education side to make makes the advising a little bit more complicated, but it's just you're trying to make the signal for the recruiter and the employer side of things as good as possible. So that's kind of what we worked on a lot last year. That's under review now. The other big thing that we're always trying to do is we work on a symposium. We have a symposium in August every year, and we have a fellows program that takes people from all over campus, no matter what your major is. So, so we see ourselves as educating the people that come to us for our majors, but also anybody that wants to go into this world, so like our job is to help you, get into these fields, to get promoted, to do all the vocational side of things alongside the educational. But the fellows program is to take people from all over, give them some specific skills, and basically add a policy aspect to whatever their core thing is. So if you come from geography or whatever, so and you're working on energy, let's look at energy security and write something specifically for that. We'll teach you how to do policy on top of your own core competency. And then you present that at the symposium, and at the symposium we'll also bring in fellows from around. Last year we brought people from, got somebody from Australia, but most of them from like DC or the West Coast or something, to really try to bring a lot of value to the people that want to see kind of big picture security stuff and how it's dealt with here. And try to gather the whole security community. So that's the other big thing about it is even if you're in DC and lots of people there work on national security and lots of other things, there's not always places for people to come together and cross-pollinate or something. So, and the same thing happens here. You go to your job at San Diego or the Air Force Base or different parts of the Air Force Base, and you never cross over and see the other folks. So we're trying to create a space where people can come together, learn what you do, and sort of facilitate as many interactions as possible. And then ideally that will build a community of people that can see themselves with something in common with each other, and then they can help each other. That's one of the big things about all national security jobs, probably all bureaucratic lines of work, is that you don't cross these seams, and so you get stovepiped. And so you just need a way to find people to talk to each other across these different pipelines. And that will, the benefit there is that they can help each other personally and professionally and network. Say, oh, I didn't know you did that. We have somebody that needs that. I know somebody that could use those skills, and you can work your way up. But also so that, okay, now I have a contact in your office. If my office needs to do something on XYZ, now I know who I can talk to. That's huge. Like, that's one of the actual values of the school that I used to work at for the Army, was that these students come to the seminar, and those 16 students get to know each other very well, and they're going to break off and go, your future unit and your future unit, you're going to need to talk to each other, build some of that same things here. So you can cross those seams and get people to work together. And that's one of the impacts that we're trying to have. And like, our goal is to improve national security in general. And we can do that through education. We can do that through educating the public. But one of it is just, we can put people in the same room and say, if you two talk together, we'll be able to solve this problem better.
Yeah. No,
I don't even know what that might be. There's a belief that could work.
Yeah, I totally know and agree with that, because it's like, you don't know what you don't know. So in a way, by collaboration, that's how you get things done.
And it's not something that you always think about. And sometimes it has a negative connotation about like who you know, but a lot of it just, that's the grease that makes that can, mixing metaphors, but they can cross those seams and really get something going. So that's very valuable. And, I'm still on, signal chats of groups, seminars that I've been on. And sometimes I'll just see them reach out and say, wait, I'm going to be in DC. Does anybody know somebody? And I've done that when I was building this national security trip to DC. It was a time where people in DC they weren't sure what their boundaries were working with civilians. A lot of people were scared in the bureaucratic world. So calling up the public affairs unit and saying, hey, I want to bring a bunch of students in. I'd say, well, we're not allowed to recruit right now. Go away. And so it's okay. I'm not trying to recruit. They're trying to learn. It's educational. If I know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody, we got into some pretty great engagements that I wouldn't have even thought of when I was putting together the initial plan, but it worked out really well. And that's just by tapping into this whole network. Somebody said, oh yeah, well, I used to work with this guy and he does something like that, or he might know somebody. And you do these little favors for each other it just builds that social capital. And because you're all working toward the same major goals, right? And it wants to help students in education. So that always helped us too. I forgot one thing that you'd asked about.
Yeah.
The thing we're working on, and I started thinking about the thing that's probably most relevant for cadets. So we want to be connected to the cadets and the midshipmen as much as possible, because you're in this world and we see ourselves as in this world. So, whenever we can have events and things like that make sense with the busy schedules that they have, we'd love to do that. But the programmatic thing that's useful for them is we're doing kind of a pilot project on what's called a 4+1 program, where, if you've got your, you've got your gen eds and your degree plan in line, your senior year, you can start taking some graduate courses that count toward your local thing. So if you're in our major, like the Global and National Security concentration of the liberal arts and integrative studies degree, if you're in that, you can start taking graduate courses that count for that major, and then they'll also count towards your master's degree. So the reason that's really useful for cadets is that if you finish your last year with 1 year of courses with us, 4 courses, you can take 4 courses because we have 8-week courses. Lots of our courses are 8-week. They're not all 8-week, but let's say you did 4 8-week courses with us that last semester, and then you can graduate. You're paying your normal tuition, and then you're going to go commission. You're going to be very busy, but at some point you'll get a little bit of time, and you might be able to sneak in a course here and there. And so you're basically already accepted to a master's program, and you can get a civilian master's ahead of your peers because you're already, not quite halfway, but not that far off from halfway. just by doing that as a 4+1. And so we've tried that out with a couple students, and it's been successful. ROTC students are really good, and they just basically kind of take a break, and we put them on a deferment. And if they get some time, then they'll come back in and take some courses. There's different points in your careers, and you can teach them better than I can, but there are different points where you can get a little bit of a place to take a knee from the operational tempo and pick up a course here and there. And because it's online, you can do it from wherever, especially these 8-week courses. And we really are flexible with those courses for working professionals because we know everyone's career is different, and we're here to serve you all. So even if you have to start one and stop, we've had some occasions like that where they got called up to do something that they weren't planning, and we'll figure it out.
Awesome. That's really much appreciated. And then what is the best way somebody can either learn more about the GNSPI program if, this is their first time hearing about it?
Yeah, so there's a couple really great ways. One, you can go to the website, which we're kind of revamping, so you can't find all the information on there. We know we're working on it, but GNSPI bring you to the big site, and from there you can click around to find the different programs that we have, the academic programs. There's one spot on there that says stay connected or sign up for the newsletter. And so if you sign up for that newsletter, you'll just get this sort of general stuff that we send out. Well, not all the specific stuff we send to students, but like, hey, we're doing this happy hour, we're doing the symposium. You can think about that, try not to overload people's inbox, let them know how they can be involved. We have a speaker coming on XYZ. And then whenever I send out an email, at the bottom of every email I ever send, in my signature line, says book a meeting with Phil Hultquist. And it has my entire availability. If it's connected to my Outlook calendar, so that basically if you find a time that works for you, click the button and it pops it onto my Outlook. So it's only going to show the ones I'm available for. And once you click on that, it's available. It puts it on my calendar, which I don't miss anything that's on my calendar now. I follow everything by that. And it creates a Teams link for us and a 30-minute meeting. So you don't have to be a prospective student. You just want to be involved. You just want to know more about it. My job is to be a little bit of a liaison between the university and lots of anybody in the security field, or anybody that might think they want to be in the security field. So I had a conversation with somebody today that was saying, I want to change my career. Like, what are some ways I can take what I have now and see what I can. So we had a great conversation. And I said, okay, I know who to put you in touch with. And I got a couple other ones that go. So, and that person's not a student. They're just somebody who's thinking about it. I'm happy to help. I see that as my role. So it's like I tell my students, you're not bothering me to get on my calendar. I want to talk to people. So if you come to me and get on my calendar, that's the best way.
Awesome. Well, Director Hultquist, thank you again.
I've had such a blast. Thanks for having me.